This is a Women with Disabilities Victoria podcast. We acknowledge that these podcasts were recorded on the traditional lands of the First Nations people of this country. We acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging. We acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded and this is and always will be Aboriginal land. From the Outskirts is a series of podcasts featuring women with disabilities who live and work in regional Victoria. I'm Liz Wright, a disability activist and advocate. I'm also the Manager of Community Inclusion and Women's Empowerment at Women with Disabilities Victoria. All the interviews were recorded in each person's home or workplace, so from time to time there is unexpected background noise. Dr. Anthea Skinner is an ethnomusicologist and McKenzie Postdoctoral Fellow at the Victorian College of the Arts. In this podcast, Anthea talks about her life, passion for music and her current research project, the Adaptive Music Bridging Program, which is changing the lives of kids with disability. There is reference to mental health and suicide in this episode. Please take care when listening, and if you need support, please call Lifeline on 131114.
Hi, I'm Dr. Anthea Skinner from the University of Melbourne, and we're on Wurundjeri country.
What's your role here at the VCA, Anthea? Hello and welcome.
Hi, thanks Liz. So I'm a McKenzie Postdoctoral Research Fellow and I'm here to work on a project with Melbourne Youth Orchestras to make their programs more accessible for students with disability.
Firstly, tell me what a McKenzie Fellow is.
So that basically means that I'm hired to do research. I have a specific project which I work on, which is with the MYO. And basically I have 3 years to make that happen, and the university funds me to do that, and it's named after Dr. John McKenzie, or Professor John McKenzie, who was a wonderful scholar over in our Faculty of Science, who's now retired, and he had a real passion for research and for interdisciplinary research, I guess, so which is why even though he's in science, he started a program that goes across the entire university. So whatever faculty you're in, you have a chance to put your best foot forward and to say, this is the project I'd like to work on for 3 years.
What a great philanthropic kind of mind to think further than just your passion across a whole university. Like, that's terrific.
Oh, and he really was, or is. He's retired.
Yeah.
A great thinker. He comes and gives us talks at the start of the year to, explain to us why what we're doing is so important. And he's, very inspirational. I feel very, very privileged to have this opportunity.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, Anthea, tell me about the project with the Melbourne Youth Orchestra and working with young people with disability around music. It seems like I don't mean this in any understated way, but it seems like a beautiful project. Everybody loves music, or music can touch you in many ways. And it seems for some young people daunting if you've got a disability.
Absolutely. And for their parents too. Musical instruments are expensive. Yeah. And, putting them in the hands of a clumsy kid with cerebral palsy can seem counterintuitive. But actually, when you're a musician, you understand that they are actually quite hardy and they can be easily repaired, and there are, ways to protect them. But I guess growing up, I couldn't play sport, not even parasport, and school bands and orchestras were my team, and I loved it. But I was almost always the only obviously disabled kid in any band I was in. I myself am an alumni of Melbourne Youth Orchestras, so I used to go along every Saturday morning with my double bass and play with them, and I loved it. And I'm very aware that they're really proactive with inclusion, and certainly the students I'm working with are not the first disabled students they have. Yeah. But I guess they just have slightly higher support needs, So what we're doing is we've developed basically, we call it a bridging program. So to join Melbourne Youth Orchestras, you need to have 1 to 2 years of experience playing your instrument, and we and MYO recognise that for some kids with disability, that's inaccessible. Finding an instrument, and B, someone who's able to teach that instrument or who is confident to teach a child with disability is not always easy.
Are you doing this on your own? Do you do the teaching of children on your own, or are you in a team?
I'm in a team, so I run the team, and we have Zoe Kalendaridis, who is a wonderful music therapist with disability as well. And it's been a conscious decision to hire folk with disability because it's really important, we think, to show the kids that there is a pathway. Yeah. We're professionals with disability who work in music, and they can be too one day. And we also have Dr. Leon de Bruin, who runs our performance education masters here. So he basically teaches music teachers to be music teachers. And so he's very interested in learning more ways to not just support disabled students, but to train teachers to support disabled students. So
it sounds fabulous.
Yeah, and of course then we've got the MYO team who back us up as well, who are there every Saturday and work with the sort of larger groups. So the idea is that our kids will spend some time with us, we'll help them. And we're in the very early stages right now. We've just had Come and Try Day a couple of weeks ago. So the kids tried out all the instruments and they're in the process of choosing them at the moment, and we'll get them in the classroom soon.
How many kids came along?
11.
Oh, fantastic.
And that was as many as we could fit. We have a waiting list of almost the same size as well, which is frustrating because we're a small group and we can't, I would love to say yes to everyone, and I'm hoping over time we will be able to. But, it's a pilot program. We only have, one room and 3 people. Yeah, so the idea is that the students will start with us and then have the opportunity to move up into the mainstream parts of the orchestra, or if they discover a passion for heavy metal or whatever, we can find a pathway that might suit them better.
Yeah.
We recognise that not all students, will be able to reach that stage, and so we're sort of looking at multiple pathways. But, basically the idea is that it's a pathway into music education, just giving them that ground floor, where they often miss out, and setting them up with teachers.
How do you find your students? Where do they come from?
We did a big call out late last year.
Yeah.
And like I said, we got more students than we could handle. And it really was, it was through the MYO website, and then a few other people picked it up. I think Limelight from the ABC magazine covered it, and we had a few things in the disability press. I'm a researcher. I've worked on lots of research projects. This is the first one where, we didn't have to try hard to get people in. People were very excited. And I guess the kids fall into 2 groups. They're kids who either they or their parents have always wanted to play music but haven't had the chance. And then we've had a couple who either are playing music but are kind of starting to hit a wall, which was very much my experience.
Which is about the limitation of their disability, or
it's
the limitation of the teaching?
It's a combination of technology, teaching and disability.
Yeah.
Some instruments are better for some disabilities than others, so you can sort of start on one instrument and then suddenly, so for me, I'm hypermobile, so I'm very bendy. So when I started playing clarinet, that wasn't a problem, and then it started, just the weight of it started to become a problem. So we got me a brace so I could hold it. And then as my disability developed, it just reached the point where that was not something I was able to do anymore, and I had to go and look for another instrument. So one of the things we're trying to do is look into the future with these kids and say, we want to set you up with an instrument that you can grow up with, that will continue to meet your needs.
Okay.
In my case, it was about my disability getting more serious, but it's also about, the needs of a beginner clarinet player or trumpet player are different to someone who's about to audition for university. And, someone who can handle it at that early level, for example, someone who had cerebral palsy might be able to hold the trumpet fairly well at beginner level. Yeah. But once you're doing really technical stuff, they might find their hands just have a little bit too much shake for that kind of thing. Yeah. And so we're trying to sort of look at those things before they hit that stage.
Yeah, yeah. So you're trying to introduce them to something that they can have a lifelong relationship with.
Exactly.
So how's it going? You've had the Come and Try Day.
Yep.
So then the kids will come back and you'll match them with their instruments.
And that's also a decision that they need to make too. Often there are 2 or 3 different options, and, their parents. And it's funny, disabled or otherwise, most kids, when they pick up the instrument they like, they know,
Yeah.
I want to play trombone, not flute, Yeah. There is a sort of personality issue that goes along with it.
Yeah.
And, there's some kids you just walk in and go, oh, look, he's going to be a trumpet player. You can see it immediately. So there's, it's not just about disability, this is something that all kids go through, but we just have a few more criteria we need to think about. And we also have a couple of students who were playing and then developed a disability and then were suddenly cut off from that instrument because of that, and we're trying to find ways for them to re-engage.
There is a grief when you can't play and you love to play and have to give up something.
Absolutely, and I've been through those stages. My disability is repeating remitting, so, I've gone for years without playing, and you kind of write it off at first, but when you get back into it, you suddenly realise how many of your friendships come from those things, how much of your sort of social life. And also I remember I have a very clear memory, after about 5 years off playing percussion, I guess when I go through relapse, it's a little bit like having a new brain injury every time. I kind of have to relearn things afterwards.
So do you have an ABI?
I have a neurological condition that was caused by an ABI, if that makes sense. It's a little complex. I got a virus in my brain as a child, and it's not. It doesn't affect me like a traditional ABI. I guess it is more like a chronic illness or a neurological condition. But because the brain is complex and there's a lot of ways it can go wrong.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
But I remember, after not playing glockenspiel for like 5 years, going along to a community band, and I remember standing in front of the music and looking at it and looking at the glockenspiel and going, oh my God, I've forgotten how to do this. The dots and the thing don't make sense to me. And I went, I'll take a deep breath. I know the music's about to start. And I remember just starting, and it's the only time in my life where I felt like I could actively feel the connections in my brain being remade in real time. As I was playing, it started to make more sense, like within 5 minutes. And by the end of the song, it was like, oh, that's right, I know how to do this.
Yeah.
And for me, that was one of the most profound, musical experiences I've ever had, even though it certainly wasn't by any means the concert platform or anything anyone would want to go and see. But it made me very aware of how important it was for me and for the way I think and for the way I operate in the world, I guess.
What else do you play besides glockenspiel?
So I started out as a clarinet player as a kid, and then
double bass.
Double bass, yeah. So I'm 6 foot tall and have been since I was 12. So the school kind of handed me a double bass and said, "What do you think?" And it looked pretty cool. So I played that for a while, and then as I've gotten older and the sort of movement in my hands has become more difficult, I moved to percussion. And look, I will never be a great percussionist. I don't move smoothly, and I never will. But I play well enough to please me, and I play well enough to I think create something that isn't virtuosic, but is certainly good music and tells a story. So that keeps me happy.
So who do you play with?
So I play with an all-disabled band called the Bear Brass Asylum Orchestra. Our lead singer is named Jess Kapuczynski-Evans, and she is just a force to be reckoned with. Those of you who've seen us pre-lockdown would know Tim Hackett, our guitarist, but over lockdown just before lockdown he moved to Darwin, so he managed to miss all of that bit.
Yeah.
But it did mean we had to find a new guitarist, so now we have Zoe, who also helped me run the MYO program. Has
Bear Brass started playing again?
We had our first concert back in, I think it was November, down for Melbourne City Mission, and that was really exciting. We had to lock down really hard. Both Jess and I, our immune systems are basically decorative. So until we were fully vaccinated, and for Jess even beyond that, we had to lock down very, very hard. So we'd meet over Zoom, and we used the opportunity to do a little bit of songwriting together and just to get to know Zoe and all of that kind of thing. And we had our first gig back in November. So it's nice to be back in the saddle, and we're hoping to start laying down some album tracks. But of course, when you have a new band member, there's all of that sort of, we need to get to know each other first before we inflict ourselves on the world. But, Zoe's been fantastic.
So besides songwriting over Zoom, were you practicing with each other musically over Zoom? Or was that too complicated?
Look, a little bit just between Jess and Zoe. Zoom has a lag, so it's actually quite hard to do it musically. There are other applications, but they're quite fancy and they're often expensive to operate and those kind of things. But I think, and I wasn't there for a lot of the stuff that Jess and Zoe did together, but, just it gave them a chance for Zoe to understand Jess's vocal range, for them to get their vocal ranges together, because Zoe does backing vocals with her. I don't sing. Let the drummer sing, said no one ever. And I respect that. So it just gave them a chance to sort of start blending their voices. But certainly anything that involves any kind of rhythm or timing is just really difficult over Zoom.
Talk about the adaptation with the instruments that you've got and what that means.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we've got 3 types of instruments. There's the, normal, quote-unquote, standard instruments, and actually, to my surprise, the majority of the kids who've come to join us will be playing pretty much standard instruments. It is more about the teaching and the patience and all of those things, and just belief, I guess, that it's all going to be okay, and that if it's not, that's okay too. So that's most of the kids. Then we have some who are playing, I guess, standard instruments with adaptations. So we might change the fingerings a little bit on an instrument, or we might find a lighter version of the same instrument, or we might put it on a specially made stand or brace for them so they can hold it more easily. But in all other ways, the instrument is played perfectly normally. Yeah. They might look a little different. So there's one kid, for example, who only has good use of one hand, and wants to play the violin, and it's the wrong hand for playing the violin, so we have just reversed the violin. We just took off its strings, took off its bridge, turned everything upside down.
Oh, wow.
And now she will play it with the other hand.
Yeah.
And then we just need to find a glove or something to help her hold the bow a little more easily, and she's off, you know.
Yeah.
So quite minor things. And then we have...
But quite minor things, but with really exciting outcomes.
Yeah, you know, and a lot of people just aren't aware that you can do it so easily, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, this child and their parents have been wondering how they could get back to playing the violin, and, you know, we would say, well, did you know we can do this? And so they then went to their violin teacher and said, could we do this? And she went, yeah, of course we can do that. And I think within a week they had the violin swapped over, you know.
Wow.
And that was, to me, that was just a beautiful thing, because, you know, you have a child who thinks she's not going to be able to do this again. And now she can. And then we've got the next level up of adaptive instruments, which are instruments that are specifically designed for people with disability, or in some cases are just designed by wackadoodle musicians who want new ways to make music, that happen to work for us well because they bring the keys closer together or whatever. And that can range from a MIDI wind instrument that looks like a saxophone but is much lighter, right through to an instrument that you can play without, you know, that you can blow on but plays a bit like a harmonica. You don't need your hands at all. So if you're a quad, that's really great.
Yeah.
That's the magic flute. And then we have like things that run off eye gaze, so you don't need to touch it at all. Literally where you look on the computer is what note will play, and you can control the volume in that. And you can combine those two things together, so you can put a MIDI wind thing onto your eye gaze, so you can control when the note starts and ends and how loud it is with your mouth, and then you can change the pitch with your eyes, you know. So it's all about working out what movements the kids have and what work best for them, and just sort of jerry-rigging something together or finding what's available on the market. And in some cases, we're going to be putting kids into our motion capture lab to really understand that, you know, especially kids with cerebral palsy where...
Okay, explain the motion capture lab.
Motion capture lab. So basically it's like we have like 12 cameras and they film the child in 3D, and then we can analyse that and we can see exactly how they're moving, and we can see exactly which movements are very controlled and, you know, are happening at a speed that is appropriate for playing music, and which takes them longer or is less precise. We have one child who, you know, will probably end up playing an instrument with her feet, and we will put together switches and things like that and gestural controllers so that as she moves her feet, she can control which notes she's playing and how loud they are and those kind of things.
And what sort of sound would it make?
Well, that's the lovely thing about electronic instruments. You can program them to sound like whatever you want them to.
Oh, amazing.
You know, so we've been doing a project with Dr. Melinda Smith, who is a dancer here. She's our dancer in residence at VCA this year. She has cerebral palsy and she's been working with a gestural controller. Now, we started working...
Break it down.
Gestural controller. Basically, where you point and where you move it, it changes the note. So it's like a little box. Often they're tied to a drumstick, and as you shake that drumstick, or, you know, it affects where it is. And you can change what the sound is and how the movement changes, you know, depending. So if you've got very small movements, you can really refine it down. So just a tiny twitch will change the note. But if your movements are all uncontrolled, you might want to have a much bigger space so that you're not accidentally setting off notes just because, you know, you have
of the twitch. Sweep of your arm or the arc.
Exactly. So we can make that play any note or any kind of music, drums, piano, harp, whatever we want. We brought Mel into the process. Mel can speak, but she is quite difficult to understand if you don't know her well. So she often uses...
a communication board.
A communication device, yep. So we went into this thinking we were making her a musical instrument, and we were, and the first thing she said was, well, could I put poetry into this? And we had not thought of that. We went, yes, you can. So she ended up on this performance where she would point, would deliver different lines of the poetry that she spoke. And then we had this wonderful thing where, okay, so she wanted to do it in her own voice, which is quite hard to understand.
Yeah.
And then we could layer that with her electronic voice. So she'd point in one direction and you'd hear her say the line in her voice, and then she'd move it slightly and it would say it in the electronic voice. So the audience could get this. It actually started to translate it for them. And once you've had that practice, you can start to understand her voice in and of itself because you've got that practice. So it became this, yes, it was a music and dance piece, but it was also poetry. And, it really confounded what our expectation was. And that's one of the wonderful things. So when you say, what can it sound like?
Anything.
Literally anything. You know, we could make one of those videos where cats meow at pitch if you wanted to, though I'm not going to recommend it.
Oh.
Yeah, we're very lucky. we're a lovely combination of performance practice and research. Not that those two things are necessarily separate, but often they do get separated, you know. So we've got wonderful performers and wonderful researchers, which we need both for these projects, obviously, you know.
Yeah.
But also, you know, our new head of VCA here, Emma Redding, you know, a lot of her background is in professional disabled dance. The head of dance here, Professor Carol Brown, she was involved heavily with Touch Compass Dance, which is New Zealand's premier integrated dance company, and they're fantastic. And I know that, you know, going to see a performance of them in a workshop with them was one of the things that got Melinda into professional dance and understanding that this was a pathway that she could go down, and now here she is. So, look, it's been a just really good timing, I think, but generally speaking, people are also very supportive of it because
it's amazing.
Because you can see how important it is.
Yeah,
you
absolutely can.
You don't need to write a really long, you know, thesis proposal to explain why it's good to have kids playing music, whether they're disabled or not, you know. So
it must be
it's an easy
such
sell.
a joyous process though. Like,
I love it. And it's also very emotional. Like, I do cry occasionally, but in a good way, you know, like, you know, when you see a kid who's really wanted to participate and has always thought they couldn't, or their parents have always thought they couldn't, you know, in the sort of original interviews we did with kids to work out how best to support them, one of the questions I said was, well, what are your musical goals, you know? And we had a little boy saying, you know, I've got 2 years left of primary school and I want to be part of the Christmas concerts because right now I sit on the teacher's lap and smile when everyone else sings and that's all I do. And I'd like, you know, and the parents saying the teachers are supportive, they just don't know how to include him in those activities. And so it's like, well, we can start to find ways, you know. So that's
a great goal.
Isn't that a great goal?
It's a fantastic goal.
And
it's
the mouths of babes,
sensible, you know. I want 2 years to get to this point.
Yeah.
And I want to participate.
Yeah. It's not, you know, I want to be a rock star and make $1 million, which is valid too, you know. But it's a lot more achievable for us with a 3-year project.
Yeah, absolutely. What else is going on for you in your life, Anthea, outside of here?
Not much, really. It's one of the things I think about being a professional musician and music researcher is, you know, music has always been my hobby. So I do struggle a little bit with work-life balance now because I'm doing my hobby as a job. But, you know, it's good.
But if there's pleasure and enjoyment in the work, then that's the work-life balance.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That is exactly right. It doesn't always feel that way, you know, at 8 o'clock on a Friday when you're still at work, but no, I mean, there's the band. I'm also doing some projects with the Indigenous Knowledge Institute here, who I used to work with here at the University of Melbourne.
What do they do? Broadly
speaking, they're there to facilitate cultural knowledge, so, you know, elders to participate in research and in the university's programs. So they've brought on 3 senior fellows, so they're at professor level, who are all senior elders in their various communities. So these are people who, you know, by Indigenous cultural standards have PhDs, are professors, you know, have that level of knowledge, but often didn't finish high school, white fell away, you know, all of those kind of things. Yeah. And so it's really acknowledging that they have a huge amount to bring to our research, but that they sometimes might need a bit of support with English or with just understanding the university systems because, like I've worked in universities for a long time, I still need help understanding university systems sometimes. So and it really is about, you know, including and recognising those kind of knowledges within our research and making sure that this isn't just, you know, white fellas saying what they reckon about other cultures, you know. So I've been working with Professor Brian Gumbala and Professor Erin Korn and Professor Marcia Langton and Professor Lisa Palmer and like a whole bunch of professors. I'm the junior one in the team.
Now I am worried about your work-life balance, really.
Well, they're all together. It's one project. There's a lot of people on one project, which makes it less. You know. But but we've just gotten back from Indonesia where we've been looking at Makassar-Yongle contact before white settlement. So a lot of Indonesian Makassar sailors would come to the northern parts of Australia to trade mostly trepang, which is sea cucumber, which they traded with China. So we've just come back from Makassar where we've been learning about that. Professor Gumbala is from the part of Australia where those Makassans first came, so he owns a lot of that law and that discussion. So we went over and spent some time in Makassar with basically bringing together Bugis elders from Indonesia and Yongle elders from Australia to sort of learn more about that history. And it was wonderful, Brian's wife has Macassan cousins because the trade is that recent, and we were able to find, they hadn't seen each other in years. We managed to track them down, and, it was a wonderful trip. So, and that's the reason I guess I'm involved in that. It sounds quite separate from what I do with disability, although there are disability links, which I won't go into in detail because it's a whole another long story. But my grandfather was actually a leading scholar in sort of Macassan history and translated a lot of the traditional texts into both modern Indonesian and into English. So I guess I've been brought on to, I was originally asked, who else is picking up from your grandfather's work? And I was like, oh, I could. Yeah. So I did 5 years of reading and,
Wow,
and stuff that I always knew, I guess, from my childhood because I grew up in that sort of milieu. So I've been, working on that and putting my knowledge of 17th to 19th century Malay trade routes to good use.
You're a very interesting woman, Anthea. You really, really are, seriously.
But it was a great trip. It was wonderful. It was one of those research trips where just every day you came back going, oh, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. So, like I said, we only got back last week, so we don't have, I can't really talk about it in any detail yet because we've got to talk with, we need to discuss with our various elders what we can and can't talk about publicly and all of those kind of things. But I guess watch this space. That'll be one of the things that we're doing later in the year. It's really exciting.
Your life seems pretty exciting.
It
really does. Like,
I feel pretty privileged. Yeah,
you're saying you're here at work, late at night sometimes and things like that. But the intersection with kind of joyous children and interesting history, other things, linking it all up, you must be like overstimulated.
A little bit. Sometimes it feels like a bit too much, and my supervisor is constantly like, you sure you don't want to narrow it down? But it keeps me very interested in the world. It's a good reason to get up in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely.
With my particular disability, mental health issues and even, suicide are a massive issue. So I guess one of the ways I was raised was to, A, to be constantly optimistic, but B, to privilege quality of life as a really important thing. And so I do this job because it makes me happy. Yeah, it pays me and that's great, and I'm very lucky to be in the position I'm in. But honestly, if they weren't paying me, I'd probably still be doing similar things just with less budget,
Yeah.
Because it makes you want to wake up in the morning and get out of bed, and that's really important.
What's your projected outcome for this project, that it becomes something sustainable, that more and more disabled kids become part of mainstream orchestras or bands or whatever, and it just becomes the norm? That
pretty much sums it up. I guess there's multiple levels of from what do we want to do tomorrow to total world domination.
Yeah.
But, I guess in the short term, and one of the things I'm starting to think about now, because I'm a year into a 3-year project, is to make sure that at the end of the 3 years, we just don't suddenly pick up and leave the MYO and leave all those kids that we've been supporting for 3 years in the lurch. So we need to make sure that we find a way to fund that. So that's one thing I'm looking at. And then also, MYO, A, it's only in Melbourne. B, we have one Saturday morning a week, that's always going to be a limited number. So we have a grant application at the moment that would allow us to run these come and try days across the state. We would do them in regional hubs. So the idea would be that we've sort of pitched is that we're working with sort of 5 local music organisations, and we'd come in for a week and we'd do some like professional development with the local music teachers, and then on the weekend we'd run come and try days, so that by the end of the week you have a bunch of teachers who are slightly trained and have somewhere they know they can come to us for more training or for more advice if they need it, and we have a bunch of students and we can kind of match them up in any given area. So that's our aim, to be able to do that across the state. And then, but really I think of it like the Paralympic model, where you have kids come and try day and it is this, and they see it now as a professional pathway, it's not just come along and kick a ball around. They actually, and their talent identification and all those kind of things. And look, honestly, I think music's a far better fit than sport, because we don't need a whole separate para in a thing, because we're not competitive.
Yeah.
And even with, I said earlier, I never played sport as a child. Well, I played a little bit of sport, but I didn't have great access to sport. Even parasport wasn't open to me because I have the wrong type of disability for parasport, because it has to be categorised to make everything even. The arts, you don't need to do that. But what we do have in common with sport is that, unlike most other forms of art, learning a musical instrument takes a good 10 years, minimum. So if you finish school and then go into a day program where you're learning music, you're already, regardless of any disability, behind the kids who were started when they were 7.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's really what I'm looking at, is that sort of early development to put people on the same track. I very much see it like the Paralympics. There's no reason why kids can't be doing this on an equal footing. And in fact, on a more equal footing than they do in sport.
If kids are learning instruments at an early age and using their fingers, their feet, their eyes, whatever they're using in this program, that training becomes cellular. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, it's embedded in your cells.
I learned to read music at the same age as I was learning to read English, so or any written language. English is my first language, so I read it with the same fluency that I read English.
Yeah.
Had I started playing, say, when I finished school, it would have been a very different learning experience,
Yeah.
So there is. It's embedded in me, and I will probably always be a musician now because I've been a musician since I was little, and that wasn't like my parents were like, over the top violin parents who, wanted to ensure my hand. I played recorder at 5, it was, perfectly age appropriate, but it just gave me that background, and that I guess that not being, people seem to be often very scared of playing music and of the notes and of the written part and of the technology we use. There seems to be a sort of a psychological barrier that I think doesn't necessarily exist with writing poetry or getting on a stage to act, or there is this idea that some people can play music and some people can't. And that's not true. Certainly the work I'm doing with Indigenous communities, they know that music is law, music is how you tell stories, music is how you remember things. It's really vital to being human, making music is what humans do. So cutting anyone off from that is, I don't think, a good idea.
I think the project sounds amazing, and I have really loved talking with you about all the work that you're doing, and it's made me feel really excited for the future, and I just really hope this funding comes through for the regional projects, because, there'll be kids out there who'll just be desperate to meet you and see the team and learn stuff, and
absolutely.
It'll be great.
And that is why we sort of started looking at the regional project. It wasn't my idea. It was because teachers in regional areas said, I've heard you're running this program in the city. Will it suit my kids? I'm like, can your kids come to University of Melbourne once a week?
Yeah.
We could certainly run them through a come and try day, but we'd need the support back home to do that. So that's really where that idea came from. So it's exciting.
Yeah,
it's and I feel like I'm at the start of something that could take multiple lifetimes to do, and that's great. So I just need an apprentice now.
I think congratulations, you're doing a beautiful job, and it's been lovely talking to you, Anthea. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz.
To find out more about Women with Disabilities Victoria, go to wdv.org.au.